Your consciousness is under attack, and the ancient world knew it first. Block 01, Gancho. Something is happening to you right now, not to your body, not to your bank account, not to your relationships, or your career, or your health, to something deeper than all of those. Something that most people never think to protect, because they don't even know it can be threatened. Your consciousness, the awareness that is reading these words right now, the presence that has been with you through every moment of your life, that is under attack. Not metaphorically, not as a conspiracy theory, as a documented, engineered, deliberately designed assault on the very capacity that makes you human. Your ability to think clearly, your ability to feel deeply, your ability to be present in your own life, rather than endlessly distracted from it, your ability to know what you actually want, rather than what you have been conditioned to want. All of it under attack. And the most disturbing part is not that it is happening, it is that most people are not only unaware of it, they are actively participating in it. Tonight, we talk about what is actually happening and what you can do about it. Bloco 2, desenvolvimento. Let us start with something that happened in 2016. A team of researchers at Harvard Medical School published a study on what they called the wandering mind. They had developed an app that would contact participants at random moments throughout the day and ask them a simple question. What are you doing right now? And are you thinking about what you are doing? The results were striking. People were not thinking about what they were doing. 46.9% of the time. Nearly half of every waking hour spent somewhere other than the present moment, thinking about something that already happened, worrying about something that might happen, planning, fantasizing, ruminating, anywhere but here. And the researchers found something else, something that the study's lead author described as a wandering mind is an unhappy mind, not occasionally unhappy, consistently, measurably. Regardless of what the person was doing, people were happier when they were present in what they were doing, even if what they were doing was something ordinary, even if what they were doing was something unpleasant, than when their minds were elsewhere, doing something they considered enjoyable. Presence itself was the variable, not the activity. Now, I want you to sit with what that actually means, because it means that the quality of your life is not primarily determined by what happens to you. It is determined by where your attention is while things are happening to you. And if nearly half of that attention is somewhere other than where you actually are, then nearly half of your life is effectively unlived, not because bad things happened, because your awareness was elsewhere when it was happening. The ancient traditions understood this with a precision and a seriousness that modern psychology is only beginning to match. The Buddhist tradition identified distraction not as a minor inconvenience, but as one of the primary causes of human suffering. The Sanskrit word for it is viksepa, mental scattering, the condition of a mind that cannot stay with what is, because it has been trained, through years of habit and cultural conditioning, to always be somewhere else. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome called it prosos, the discipline of attention, and they considered it not a spiritual practice reserved for monks and philosophers, but the fundamental requirement of a life worth living. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire in the world, returned to this theme again and again in his private journals, that the quality of a life is determined by the quality of attention brought to it, that you can live a life of extraordinary circumstance and miss most of it because your mind was somewhere else, and you can live a life of complete ordinariness and inhabit every moment of it fully, and the second life is richer by every measure that actually matters. The Egyptian priests understood this too. Their entire initiatic tradition was built around one central practice, not prayer, not ritual, not the memorization of sacred texts, the cultivation of present awareness, the ability to be fully here, in this body, in this moment, without the mind scattering into past and future, into worry and fantasy and endless mental noise. They called this quality of attention the eye of Horus, not a metaphor for a supernatural power, a description of what human consciousness looks like when it is functioning as it was designed to function: clear, undivided, fully present, fully awake. And they understood something that the Harvard researchers confirmed 3,000 years later, that this quality of attention is not our natural default state. It has to be cultivated, protected, deliberately maintained against forces that continuously work to fragment it. Which brings us to the question that this entire conversation is about. What are those forces? Where do they come from? And why? In the 21st century, are they more powerful than they have ever been? Bloco 3, Desenvolvimento 2 em 2004. A social media platform launched. It was described as a way to connect people, to bring friends and family closer together, to share moments and memories across distances. That was the public story. The private story was something else entirely. Because what the engineers who built these platforms discovered very early in the process was that human attention was not just a byproduct of the product, it was the product. The thing being manufactured, packaged and sold to advertisers at a scale that had never existed before in human history, and to maximize the amount of attention they could capture. They did something that no one had ever done before. They hired neuroscientists, psychologists, behavioral economists, people who understood at a deep and technical level exactly how the human brain works, exactly what triggers the dopamine system, exactly what creates compulsive behavior, exactly what makes it impossible to stop scrolling, even when you want to, even when you know you should, even when some part of you is watching yourself scroll and feeling vaguely sick about it. They studied the neuroscience of slot machines and applied it to their feed, the variable reward schedule, the unpredictable arrival of something interesting, amidst the stream of the ordinary, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive, applied to the most intimate spaces of daily life: the bedroom, the bathroom, the dinner table, the moments before sleep, the moments after waking, the spaces that used to be filled with nothing, just presence, just the quiet of a mind that was not being stimulated. Those spaces are now almost entirely gone, and with them, something that the ancient traditions considered absolutely essential to human well-being: the capacity for genuine rest, not the rest of sleep, the rest of an unoccupied mind, a mind that is not processing input, not reacting to stimulation, not being pulled in 17 directions simultaneously, just resting in its own awareness. The ancient Hermetic tradition had a specific teaching about this. They described the human mind as a vessel, and they taught that a vessel that is always full cannot receive anything, that the constant filling of the mind with external stimulation does not enrich it, it depletes it. Because what the mind needs, what consciousness requires to function at its deepest level, is space, silence, the fallow field, the pause between notes, without which there is no music, only noise. The Taoist tradition expressed this through the concept of Wu Wei, not passive emptiness, active receptivity, the quality of a mind that is not grasping, not reacting, not being dragged from stimulus to stimulus, but resting in its own natural clarity, available, present, open to what actually is, rather than perpetually distracted by what might be, or what was, or what someone else thinks you should want. Now, I want to be precise about something here, because this conversation is not about technology being evil. It is not about social media being the enemy. The tools are neutral. What is not neutral is the intentional engineering of those tools to exploit the deepest vulnerabilities of human neurology for commercial purposes, without the informed consent of the people being exploited. Former employees of these platforms have described, in documented public testimony, sitting in rooms where the explicit goal was to increase what they called time on platform, not to make users happier, not to make their lives better, not to strengthen their relationships or deepen their understanding, to keep them there longer, by any means necessary. And the means they found were not neutral. They were specifically designed to bypass the rational mind, to circumvent the capacity for conscious choice, to make you act before you have decided to act, to scroll before you have chosen to scroll, to react before you have chosen to react, to feel before you have had the chance to think about what you feel. This is not an accident. It is engineering, precise, documented, deliberate. And the ancient traditions called what it produces by a very specific name. They called it sleep. Not the sleep of the body, the sleep of consciousness. The condition of a mind so fragmented, so continuously stimulated, so thoroughly distracted from its own depth, that it cannot find its way back to itself, that it has forgotten what silence feels like, that it has lost the capacity to simply be, without input, without stimulation, without something to react to. This is the attack, not on your opinions, not on your beliefs, on your capacity for genuine awareness itself. Block 04, Disinvolvimento 3. But the engineering of distraction is only the first layer of the attack. There is something beneath it, something older, something that the ancient traditions warned about, long before social media existed, long before the internet existed, long before the printing press, or the radio, or the television, or any of the technologies we associate with the modern assault on attention. The second layer of the attack is not technological, it is psychological. And it has been operating for as long as human civilization has existed. It is the attack on your ability to know what you actually think, not what you have been told to think, not what your culture assumes, not what the people around you believe, so automatically and so completely. That questioning, it feels almost physically uncomfortable. What you actually think when you sit alone in genuine silence, when the noise stops, when the opinions of others, the expectations of your family, the assumptions of your profession, the tribal loyalties of your political identity all fall away. And there is just you and the question, what do I actually believe? Most people never find out. Not because they are stupid, not because they are incurious, but because they are never genuinely alone with the question. Because the moment the noise stops, something fills it. A phone, a podcast, a conversation, anything that prevents the silence from becoming loud enough to hear what is actually there. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates was executed for asking this question, not for answering it, for asking it, for going into the marketplace and inviting people to examine what they actually believed, rather than simply assuming they already knew. The charge against him was corrupting the youth. But the real charge was more precisely this. He was making people think for themselves, and a population that thinks for itself is considerably harder to govern than a population that believes it thinks for itself, while actually thinking what it has been told. The Gnostic tradition, one of the most radical mystical movements in the ancient world, built their entire philosophy around this distinction. They described two types of human beings, not in terms of intelligence or virtue, in terms of the source of their thoughts. The first type they called the Helics, people who were entirely asleep, who moved through life on autopilot, whose thoughts were entirely produced by their conditioning, by their culture, their upbringing, their social environment, who had never had an original thought, in the precise sense of a thought that originated in them, rather than passing through them from outside. The second type they called the pneumatics, people who had awakened to the difference between a thought that is genuinely theirs and a thought that has been placed in them, who had developed the capacity to observe their own mental activity from a place of awareness. That was not itself a product of conditioning. Who could sit with the question, what do I actually think? And wait for an answer that came from somewhere real. The Gnostics did not believe this distinction was fixed. They believed it was a practice, a discipline, a capacity that could be developed or lost, depending on the conditions you lived in and the choices you made about those conditions. And they believed that the forces arrayed against this development were not accidental, that there were specific mechanisms in ordinary social life, specifically designed to keep people in the first category, asleep, reactive, producing thoughts that felt like their own, but were actually the thoughts of the system, moving through them. Now, I want to pause here, because I am aware that this can start to sound like a conspiracy theory. What I am saying is more subtle and more disturbing, because you do not need a conspiracy to produce a population that cannot think for itself. You only need a system that rewards conformity more than originality, that punishes genuine questioning more than comfortable agreement, that makes it socially costly to hold an opinion that differs from the tribal consensus, that fills every moment of silence with stimulation. You do not need a conspiracy for that. You just need the ordinary dynamics of a culture that has lost its relationship with silence, with solitude, with the practice of genuine self-examination. A culture that has forgotten what the ancient traditions universally understood, that the examined life is not just philosophically preferable to the unexamined one. It is the only life. in which genuine consciousness is actually present. Blocco cinque disinvolvimento quattro. There is a third layer, deeper than distraction, deeper than the colonization of thought, something that the ancient traditions considered the most dangerous attack of all, because it does not target what you think. It does not target where your attention goes. It targets something more fundamental than either of those. It targets your relationship with what you feel. Not your emotions in the ordinary sense, not happiness or sadness or anger or fear. Something beneath those, the raw, unmediated, direct experience of being alive, the felt sense of existing, of being here, of mattering. Not because someone told you that you matter, because you can feel it directly, without intermediary, without someone else's validation, without a number on a screen telling you how many people approved of something you said. The ancient traditions had a word for this capacity. The Vedic tradition called it Ananda, usually translated as bliss, but the translation is misleading. Ananda is not an emotion, it is not a peak experience. It is the baseline quality of consciousness, when it is not being interfered with, the natural condition of awareness, when it is resting in itself, when it is not defending against something, or grasping at something, or performing for someone, or measuring itself against an external standard. Just here, alive, present, complete. Not because anything particular has happened, because this is what consciousness feels like, when nothing is attacking it. The problem is that most people have never experienced this, not because it is rare, not because it requires extraordinary spiritual achievement, but because the conditions of modern life have been so thoroughly engineered to prevent it. Think about what happens when you feel something difficult: grief, loneliness, boredom, anxiety, the ordinary response in a culture saturated with distraction is immediate. Reach for the phone, put on something to watch, call someone, eat something, do anything. That will replace the difficult feeling with something more manageable, more stimulating, more immediately rewarding. And this response feels entirely reasonable. It feels like self-care. It feels like emotional intelligence. Why would you sit with something painful when you could make it stop? But here is what the ancient traditions understood, that modern culture has almost completely forgotten. The difficult feeling is not the enemy. It is information. It is your consciousness trying to tell you something about your life, about what needs attention, about what is out of alignment between how you are living and what you actually are. And when you reach for the distraction, every single time the difficult feeling arrives, you are not managing your emotions. You are cutting the signal. You are preventing your own consciousness from completing the message it was trying to send. The Sufi tradition had a teaching about this. They described the human heart as a mirror, and they taught that the mirror could only reflect clearly when it was polished, and what polished it was not comfort, was not the elimination of difficulty, was the willingness to sit with what was difficult, without immediately reaching for relief, to let the difficult feeling move through completely, without suppression, without amplification, without the story the mind immediately constructs about what the feeling means, and why it is unbearable, and how it needs to stop right now. Just feeling it with the same quality of presence. that the sky brings to the weather moving through it, not affected, not damaged, not diminished, simply present with what is. Rumi wrote about this in the 13th century. In a poem that has survived because it is true, he described the human being as a guest house, and every emotion as a visitor. Joy, depression, meanness, all of them arriving as unexpected guests. And his instruction was not to manage them, not to suppress them, not to immediately replace them with something more pleasant. His instruction was, welcome them all, because each one has been sent as a guide from beyond, not as a problem to be solved, as a teacher, arriving at the exact moment when you are ready to learn what it has to teach. And the modern assault on consciousness, at its deepest level, is the systematic elimination of the conditions under which that learning can occur, the filling of every silence, the replacement of every difficult feeling with something more immediately rewarding, the training of an entire civilization to treat its own inner life as a problem to be managed rather than a reality to be inhabited, a signal to be received, a teacher to be welcomed, and what is lost, when that training succeeds, is not just comfort, not just peace of mind. What is lost is the very mechanism through which consciousness develops, through which wisdom accumulates, through which a human being becomes genuinely, rather than just performatively, awake. Blocco says, desinvolvimento cinco. So what do you do if distraction is engineered, if the colonization of thought is structural, if the suppression of genuine feeling is the default mode of a culture that has forgotten what consciousness actually is? What do you do? The ancient traditions had answers, not as abstract philosophy, as specific, practical, tested technologies for protecting consciousness against exactly the forces we have been describing. And what is remarkable is how consistent those answers are across traditions separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The first answer, guard the gates. The Egyptian tradition described the human being as a temple, and every temple has gates, points of entry, through which things from outside enter the inner space. For the human being, those gates are the senses. What you see, what you hear, what you read, what you allow into your awareness on a daily basis. The ancient initiates understood that consciousness is shaped by what it is continuously exposed to, not in a vague or metaphorical sense, in a precise and measurable sense. The mind becomes what it repeatedly encounters. The Hermetic principle of vibration states everything moves, everything vibrates, and consciousness, like a tuning fork, tends to match the frequency of what it is most consistently exposed to. This is why the initiates were so careful about what they allowed into their awareness, not out of fear, not out of judgment, but because they understood that every piece of content you consume, every conversation you participate in, every environment you spend time in is not neutral. It is either raising or lowering the quality of your consciousness, making you more present or less present, more awake or more asleep, more yourself, or more a product of what has been placed in you. The question the ancient traditions asked was not, is this entertaining? Is this true? Is this beautiful? Does this make me more awake or less? The second answer, reclaim the silence. Every major wisdom tradition, without exception, required its practitioners to spend regular time in silence, not the silence of having nothing to say, the active silence of a mind that has deliberately withdrawn from external stimulation, that is resting in its own awareness, that is listening, not to anything in particular, but to the quality of its own presence. The desert fathers of early Christianity left the cities of the Roman Empire and went into the wilderness, not to escape the world, to find something that the world, in its constant noise and activity, made impossible to hear. They called it hesychia, inner stillness, the quality of a mind that has become quiet enough to perceive what was always present beneath the noise. And they discovered what every contemplative tradition discovers when the noise finally stops, that what is present in the silence is not nothing, it is everything, the awareness that has been here all along, beneath the distraction, beneath the noise, beneath the endless stream of stimulation that modern life uses to fill every available moment, still here, unchanged, waiting. The third answer: know the difference between your thoughts and you. This is perhaps the most radical teaching of every wisdom tradition and the most practically useful. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts arise. There is a difference, and that difference is everything. Because a person who does not know the difference cannot protect their consciousness, cannot distinguish between a thought that is genuinely theirs and a thought that has been placed in them by culture, by algorithm, by the continuous pressure of a social environment that rewards certain kinds of thinking and punishes others. The Zen tradition developed a specific practice for cultivating this distinction. Zazen, sitting in stillness, not to stop thinking, but to observe thinking, to watch the thoughts arise and pass from a place that is itself not a thought, to discover through direct experience that there is something in you that is not affected by the content of the thoughts, that watches them move through the way the sky watches clouds, without identification, without being swept away, without becoming what passes through it. And from that place of observation, a different kind of clarity becomes possible. The clarity of a mind that can see its own contents without being entirely consumed by them. That can ask, is this thought true? Is this thought mine? Is this thought serving my actual life or someone else's agenda? And act from the answer rather than from the reflex. This is what the ancient traditions were protecting, not a belief system, not a set of rituals, not a path to some future state of liberation. The immediate, practical, utterly essential capacity to be the author of your own inner life rather than its passive recipient, to be awake in your own consciousness rather than asleep inside it, to be, in the most fundamental sense, free. Block 07, CTA plus Disinvolvimento 6. If you have stayed with me this far, if something in this conversation has landed, has made you pause, has made you look at your own life and recognize something you had not quite put into words before, I want to say something directly. This channel exists for exactly this, not for entertainment, not for or content that fills your feed and disappears without a trace, for the kind of conversation that stays with you, that you find yourself returning to in the quiet moments, in the spaces between things, when the noise drops low enough that something real can be heard. If that is what you are looking for, subscribe to Sacred Flame, because what we are building here, video by video, Layer by layer is something rare, a space where consciousness is taken seriously, where the ancient wisdom is not dressed up or watered down or turned into a productivity hack, but offered as it was always intended to be offered, as a genuine transmission from those who look carefully to those who are ready to look. And I want you there for what comes next. Now, there is one more thing I need to tell you, something that changes everything we have discussed, because we have talked about the attack. We have talked about what is being stolen. We have talked about the ancient technologies for protecting it. But there is a question underneath all of that I have been building toward from the very beginning. Why does it matter? Not in the practical sense, in the deepest sense. Why does consciousness matter enough to be worth protecting? Why did the ancient traditions treat it as the most precious thing a human being possessed? More precious than health, more precious than wealth, more precious than relationship, or status, or achievement. Why? The answer is the most important thing I will say tonight, and it changes everything. The ancient traditions did not value consciousness because it made life more comfortable, or more productive, or more socially successful. They valued it because they understood something about what consciousness actually is. Something that modern culture has almost entirely forgotten. Consciousness is not a tool. It is not a faculty. It is not a byproduct of neurological activity. That happens to be useful for navigating the world. Consciousness is what you actually are, not what you have, not what you use, what you are. The awareness that is receiving these words right now is not something that belongs to you. It is not something located inside your skull. It is not produced by your brain. The way heat is produced by a fire. It is what you are at the most fundamental level, before the name, before the history, before the personality that assembled itself from years of experience and conditioning and choice. What you are is awareness. And when consciousness is attacked, when it is fragmented and distracted and colonized and numbed, what is being attacked is not a faculty. It is you, the actual you, the one that was here before all the rest of it, the one that will be here when all the rest of it is gone. And this is why the ancient traditions treated its protection not as a lifestyle choice, not as a wellness practice, not as a productivity strategy, as the central task of a human life. Because a life lived in attack consciousness is not just an uncomfortable life. It is life in which the most essential thing you are never fully shows up, never fully inhabits the experience, never fully arrives in its own existence. Blocco 8, Fechamento Magistral. I want to leave you with an image, not an argument, not a conclusion, an image. Imagine a flame, not a large flame, a small one, a candle flame burning in a room. Now imagine that room has no walls. The wind comes from every direction, constantly, from the left and the right, from above and below. An endless stream of air, moving in every direction simultaneously. And the flame flickers, bends, is pushed this way and that, never extinguished, but never still, never burning with its full light, never quite reaching the clarity and warmth that it is capable of, because the wind never stops. This is what attacked consciousness looks like. Not dead, not destroyed, just never fully itself, never burning with its full capacity, never illuminating what it could illuminate. If the conditions were right, if the wind would stop, Now imagine the same flame in the same room, but this time someone has built a shelter around it. Not to imprison the flame, to protect it, simple walls, enough to break the constant wind, not to eliminate all movement, not to seal the flame in perfect stillness forever, just enough to give it the conditions it needs, to find its own natural height, its own natural clarity, its own natural warmth. And watch what happens. The flame steadies, it rises, it burns with a quality of light that the flickering flame could never produce. Not because the flame changed, because the conditions changed. The flame was always capable of this. It just needed protection to become what it already was. This is what the ancient traditions were doing, not creating consciousness, not enhancing it, not upgrading it, protecting it, building the shelter that allows the flame that is already there to burn as it was always designed to burn, with full light, with full warmth, with full presence. You are that flame. You have always been that flame, not a flickering version of it, not an attacked version of it, not a distracted, fragmented, colonized, numbed version of it. The flame itself, fully present, fully capable, fully alive. And everything we have talked about tonight, the distraction, the colonization of thought, the suppression of genuine feeling, the systematic assault on your capacity for presence, none of it has extinguished what you are. It has only created wind and wind. No matter how constant, no matter how engineered, no matter how deliberately directed at the flame, cannot extinguish what is fed from within. It can only make it flicker, and a flame that knows it is flickering is already halfway to stillness, because awareness of the attack is the beginning of the shelter. The moment you recognize what is happening to your consciousness is the moment it begins to happen less, not because the forces arrayed against it have stopped, because you have stopped participating in your own diminishment, because you have remembered what you actually are. And what you actually are does not need to be created, does not need to be achieved, does not need to be earned through sufficient spiritual effort. It only needs to be recognized, returned to, protected, the way you protect anything that matters, with attention, with intention, with the willingness to build a shelter against the wind and tend the flame every day. Not because it is easy, because nothing more important exists. If something in this conversation reached you, if the flame metaphor landed somewhere real, if you recognize something tonight that you had felt but never named, share this with 5 people, not to promote a channel, but because somewhere in your life there is someone whose flame is flickering, who has forgotten what it feels like to burn steadily, who has been in the wind so long, they have started to believe the flickering is normal. Give them this and leave a comment below. Not a reaction, something real. Tell me what you recognize tonight. Tell me where in your own life the wind has been loudest and what shelter you have found. And if there is something you want to explore next, a question that has been living in you, that you have never quite found the right words for, leave it there, because that question might be exactly where we go next. Together, subscribe to Sacred Flame, because the flame deserves to burn clearly, and we are only just beginning to build the shelter